The other thing in terms of design of hospitals, I was thinking is it, and again, this is something I would like to discuss with other members of the panel, Opali, who's expert also in healthcare design. Is it that we think about, for example, preparing hospitals for such situations, designing hospital which could be created within the hospital with a clear division between infected and non-infected zone, but without impeding internal communication of the building. So yeah, these are my points. The final point would be that conscious cities are conscious citizens. So we've got all right to good information, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
I think we had a lot of perspective in terms of first looking at the basic equity in terms of the disease and looking at health issues and looking at ways of means and procedures. But as a layman who is experiencing all of it, and more as a person who has been involved in organizing or enabling organizations or setting up companies, working on policy, the way I look at it is that conscious cities and connectivity. Today, whole of this world, most of the transformation has happened because of the connectivity, because of the trade, because the way we travel. But all of them, somewhere, I think we have forgot our original way of, as Ms. Upali was talking about, living with respect to nature, light, environment, and things like that. So how do we balance our way of living, which is a conscious way of living with our society, empathizing with our society, relating with our people, and at the same time leveraging technology? But again, above all, the biggest problem, most of these problems, we see that again, we spoke of equity, but unfortunately we said that there is huge, difference between, the haves and the have-not. On one side, for example, just between India, China, and US today, we have maybe, over 80% of the billionaires. And India is such a small country, but then we have next, also the largest population between India and China, we again cover close to 40% of population, 35-40% of population. And again, goods are being, because I'm looking at it as a connectivity, as a conundrum. On one side, we want the connectivity which brought in wealth, which brought in this connectivity. Today, I can sit anywhere, anytime, see anything, transport, do a deal with trade, get information, enjoy music. But at the same time, this is the same connectivity which has brought in the disease also. Because, if you look at even India, out of the 6,500 plus cases, you see that majority of them have come from, unfortunately, whether it has come from, maybe it is England, Germany, Italy, China, Iran, Dubai, Saudi Arabia. So these are the places from there, the key clusters where the disease. So connectivity is both an enabler and also a disabler at the same point. So now therefore, how do we come out of this? Conscious means then we are responsible. We are relating to the people around us. We are relating to the city. And consciousness, again, from time immemorial, our Vedas and Shastras have always spoken about everything, because as together we worship trees, plants, mountains, rivers as much as we worship the human being. And then in somewhere else we say we are all one. And therefore, that is where which we have lost that connect. We don't even, we are linking to people across hundreds of kilometers, but we do not know next door neighbor. Maybe the COVID-19 has forced us to know our neighbor, and as some of the many WhatsApp jokes saying, for once praying that let my neighbor be as well as I am. So that, we are well off. So therefore, this connectivity, therefore, what does it mean and how do we consciously connect? That means how do we blend the old and the new in a very equitable way is something we need to look at. And that is where, and especially coronavirus, and you see it is a respiratory disease. It has to do, and most of the time it is happening just through our nasal or through our mouth and through organs, which therefore, and some of the old traditional means says that if I could literally, cleanse them more regularly, I could be in a way, cleanse myself of my disease, or at least control it to a certain extent. And that is where I think, say, for example, Ayurveda talks of, prognostic, food as a means to disease. And whole of today's sustainable development, whether it is about environment, whether it is about connectivity, whether it's about travel, whether it's about health, it says prognostic healthcare. So the prognostic healthcare was inherently there when I was looking at, so preventing a disease before it happens. It already existed with my Ayurveda or Unani or Siddha Vaidya. There, it was not taking care for a symptom, but proactively taking care. And then, so while proactively we are taking care, therefore I say the city with the connectivity has to proactively take care of everything from business to health to environment to my living and to my social well-being and healthy state of mind. And that is, therefore, it's a very complicated mix. I don't think we will all be able to talk about it in this 1 hour that we are talking. But somewhere I would say that, see, can we look at what are the enablings? We have it now. We are trying. I am sure we will come out of the process. But then can we look at, say, how do we go back to that simple living? Where can we, because now it clearly says even staying at home, I could do the work. So how do I optimize distances? And see that we do more work at home rather than traveling. Or if you're doing trade, why is it that, a pin, a paper or a potato should travel all the way from one part of the world to the other? And again, traveling from a, say, tropic region, which has water issues, grows with more water, a potato, and goes to a country which has plenty of water and they don't, and therefore it is now destabilizing the whole of sustainability, but then the cost is low because just of the arbitration. And many of the unrelated costs are not put into it. Say because maybe they're subsidized or free, whether the water, the environment. And so how do we now bring a metrics to even say define a cost, including long-term damage of sustainability built into it, for whether it's a potato, whether it's a paper or a pin. So how do we now create a cost matrix which is not sheerly labor and production, but all the non-tangible parameters built in, so that we are conscious of my fellow being, whether he is in Havana, whether he is in Bermuda, or whether he is somewhere in Fiji Islands, because whether the fish comes from Fiji, how do I take care? So therefore I think this conscious living and connectivity should enable us today, and with amount of data that we have, to develop matrices to define the cost, looking at the long-term non-tangible issues which we have not considered while defining, and not look at the sheer physical labor. And also just imagine transporting a potato or a brinjal or oboji from Africa or India all the way to Japan. And then, but if you go to buy here in Japan 4-5 ladies finger or okra, you pay 200 yen. And packed it in beautiful packets, whereas here you would get 10 kgs for the same thing, just like that in the open. So therefore, can we now look at this as an opportunity, as we said, to define rules, regulations, and parameters of what we trade, how we price them, looking into the equity, looking into, because as I said, the disparity between the rich and the poor is only enlarged. Though, of course, communism, we have many isms which have killed us, whether it is capitalism or communalism, ritualism, religion, all sorts. So I am against any ism. But at the same time, it is very critical that can we leverage this whole of the problem that we have to recreate, leverage technology, leverage connectivity, but and also the big data and analytics to define cost, to define what should be traded, what should not be, and at what cost can it go from which country to which place. And so that, for example, now health, of course, prognostic healthcare, as much as I am looking at taking vitamin tablets, can I look at the healthy living style of, say, a Japanese or a Korean or an Indian, where, if Okinawa, somebody could live up to 80 years without any problem, not even a wrinkle. And here everybody puts all sorts of creams and has all the problem. So how do we look at all of this parameter and bring them together with our knowledge and without connectivity? Or even a very simple thing, for example, say now half the problem was maybe we were handshaking, but the Eastern, Asian countries, whether it's bowing as it is in Japan, or saying namaste, is again, say, today a very good social way of greeting. And at the same time, I'm also preventing possibly a contamination from my hand or from my, say, physical nearby presence. So I could even do this from a distance. So therefore, when we look at this, so we think there is a need for holistic change in our thinking, in times of in the ways we live, the way we greet, way we interact, way we trade, and also, of course, leverage technology. I mean, so because we are in the age of Internet of Things, anything and everything connected. I mean, it may look a bit odd, but then we can connect everybody's toilet and everybody's sewerage. So I would know where there is going to be a collective, I mean, from looking at that, when there is going to be an epidemic, which is going to happen. So because the cities are connected, architecturally well planned, seamlessly integrated as smart cities with prognostic healthcare and prognostic, safety of smart energy, smart water, smart health built in, then I know that these region has a problem, or these people are having an issue, because when a wireless network, Internet of Things, allows us to even measure the data and give an information, or just my watch, or my, even say, we look at from my sweat, say what is happening to me, or my clothing could give the information to my mobile phone and transmit and saying this person is, and that is the level of capability artificial intelligence, machine learning, data, big data analytics is bringing into the process. So from social life to technology to connectivity, and again, ethical pricing, I mean, matrix for defining this price of product systems, so that we know how do we trade more efficiently, and not that, I mean, literally, I mean, you buy all the wood from, I mean, cutting out the Brazilian forest, and suddenly, I mean, the Japanese, so okay, I will do a now composite material, and then Brazil has gone down the drain, or I mean, Latin American country, because it has no more wood and its natural forests have been avoided. So therefore, I think sustainability in all its facets has to be seamlessly integrated with the system and design thinking in anything and everything that we do. I mean, from our social life to technology, and that is, but then leverage all the benefits of connectivity so that we still allow, I mean, because in a way today it's also equitable because of the connectivity, and whether it's a panwala, I mean, somebody selling, I mean, betel nut leaves, tea, coffee, or sending vegetable, or the person who comes to work at my home can talk to 10 people and also carry on business. This has enabled them also to become more of a, I mean, grow up in their stature in life. So therefore, we need to create new normals or new statures for connectivity, for interaction, for trade. And how do we do it? I think, as we said, maybe this is just a set of questions we are raising or thought points for engagement. But this has to be leveraged to create a blend of the best of both. I mean, our old sustainable, because again, as we know, even if we look at the spread, people, it is maybe corona seems to be more of a rich man's disease than a poor man's disease. Because people who already had BCG vaccine, tuberculosis, malaria, or things like that, they seem to be less prone than people who did not have it. And then, but at the same time, if everybody were to do a plasma treatment, what are the type of problems that would come if I have to do a plasma-enabled treatment? Because it needs far more care. So can I do a more simpler treatment? I mean, just prognostic before having the health issue. So these are things which need to be discussed. I know we all could talk endlessly, but I see so many exciting opportunity for collaboration, for research, from city and town planning to health enabling to, I mean, social life and living and ways of interaction. And I think so it's a God-given opportunity for us to reset all our bad habits, throw them away, and move into more sustainable, happy, healthy living, really knowing my neighbor as much as knowing my other fellow human being across the globe. So it's, I think, a very interesting opportunity. Yes, it will pass. I am sure. I'm a born optimist. I don't think this, and compared to having HIV or even SARS, maybe, I mean, the level of mortality is far lesser. And maybe anyway, immunity is supposed to be developing. So I look forward to it in the positive way that maybe for once we are changing to becoming a more environmentally conscious, societally engaged, more empathetic human being, as we should have been, because we have the highest amount of capability, but we have been the worst. And therefore, even the animals and the birds are happy, but then we are the people who are suffering by this disease. So how do we change from this? And leveraging this connectivity is very critical. So it's both, the banes have to be taken out, the boons have to be brought in, and it's best for all of us. I'm sure we can discuss more. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. We can move on now to Guy.
Yeah. How long do you want me to speak for? What's your timing like? I don't want to override. Okay. So first of all, I'm happy that this is such a big topic, because following these three panelists is quite a difficult thing. A lot of things were covered. But I want to start with, first of all, I'm in my home. I rearranged my home so that you would have something to look at and some plants in the background. And I think as a kind of segue to the topic, it's really interesting for us to think about how our relationship with space is changing. On the one hand, I feel that it's similarly to Natalia, and I think probably all the panelists do, we feel it's too early to call big decisions. Even the numbers that we have now are distorting reality, and we're only going to partly know the situation in the future. So saying that I've been really hesitant to kind of have any conclusions from this situation. The other caveat to that is that we have a lot of examples of big things happening in history that felt like they were going to change the world and that didn't. And part of that is related to also the science of the psychology of this situation and other crises. Humanity has a very short-term memory relatively for these things. And I feel like that it's quite difficult in a conversation to hear people saying going back to the norm, because what does going back to the norm mean? One of the, I think kind of ironically, and this was talked about before, one of the reasons that coronavirus has had such a huge impact is because we've designed ourselves into density. We are drawn to cities because of that density, because of the social, economic draws of a city. I'm not sure that's going to change. And I think because that's not going to change, I think we need to go into this new period by asking a lot of questions, which is different to the period before, which I feel we had a lot of answers. People were very interested in answers rather than questions. And I think if there's one big reset button that is of any value here, is how can we go into the future by asking questions rather than giving answers? And what that means is having the curiosity and the courage to ask ourselves, was our relationship with the built environment good in the first place? And if so, and if it wasn't, why did we get into this situation? And on that, I want to say a couple of things. We are creatures of habit, and society is driven by inertia a lot of the time. All of our, the way that we see ourselves in front of society, the way that we construct our identity in front of our social peers is a lot related to the situations that the city gives us in terms of putting us in a social context. And also that everything we value ourselves by is in relation, so it's also related to Daniel Kahneman in terms of references, but it's always in reference to the people around us. And this inertia brings up two questions. When we go back into the streets, do we try and get to the same inertia that we had before? And I think the answer to that, if we're wise, is no. Inequality is something that has been a problem and always been a problem. We've had world wars and we went back to wars. We had more socialist periods and we had more capitalist periods. And I think the things that unify us forgetting and perhaps not reacting to it in a holistic way that perhaps we should have is the fact that some of it is visible, invisible, and hard to remember. I'm going to give a very short example of how different metrics and the way that we evaluate performance or success changes our environment. If you think of airplane seats, which none of us are going on in the near future, but airplane seats in our in the last decade or 2 decades have grown gradually closer and closer to each other till the point where our knees don't really have the airspace in front of us. That's because the metric behind this kind of evolution of space is profit. The more seats you put into a plane, the more profit you get. The health of the passenger here isn't really a thing to think about, only to fit within the standards of whatever standards the government imposes onto these companies. The thing about performance measures is that they drive evolution of a space. They drive the values of cultures because they are visible, because we give numbers to things. And the only thing that I would ask, and I think there's a lot of question marks around this situation, is that when we go back out there, people like us working in design and architecture, and anyone working in relation to the human experience, start making the invisible visible. Start putting numbers to loneliness more than we had before. Start putting numbers to connectivity. Start researching what do we need, what can we do without, and what do we have to have in this situation. And by starting this period by asking questions rather than giving answers of how we should return to the norm, I think is a scientific way, and probably will lead us to better results in the future, even though we can't know that yet. But my main idea here is that we need to rethink what success means when we are designing our cities.
Well, that was really interesting, of course. I mean, just to wrap up the talks that were given now before we open the floor to questions. Well, there were two things that actually were very clear across all the talks. One was, of course, how each of you looked at connection and connectivity, them being different things, and also the evaluation of that connection and connectivity. Like Upali spoke about how our relationship with space and the city sort of affords a certain kind of social interaction, and that the fact that our environments are designed in a certain way have obviously tried to help us in this crisis at this current time. And we do seem to have some degree of resilience in our environments to, well, probably at least help us or nudge us into moving into the digital side of connection, while we don't lose the qualities of trust and the qualities of, say, faith in general in human beings that we not more about other side on how decisions are made, and especially with the example of the field of medicine, where protocol and certain administrative certain guidelines are there in order to make the decision making a little more fluent, a little more proactive, but at the same time effective in such crises. And then, of course, Satya sir spoke about a systems level connectivity and integration, and in a way that we can actually harness connectivity and connections as they have been existing, as opposed to letting them be the bane in terms of spreading a disease, which is what happened. And how maybe even cultural factors can actually affect how we connect with people, and how maybe it's a good time to sort of look within ourselves and within our community to actually see if there are things that we are doing differently than other cultures that actually affect the way we can deal with future pandemics. And well, of course, I did speak about he also spoke about the changing relationship that we have with space right now, with a beautiful example of his own house and living room right now. But more than that, the more important thing that he mentioned was about evaluation metrics, and how moving towards human-centered metrics can actually take us closer to solving these problems, because at the end of the day, it's human beings who are facing these problems. The nature, of course, I mean, when it comes to Satya sir's comments about integrating our goals with the sustainable development goals, yeah, of course, that needs to happen in tandem with human experience related measures as well. Because as we move closer towards sustainability, we might also need to think about how people on the ground are feeling about it. Because if we don't take care of that, then of course the quality of life will go down. As we recently, I think there was an article that came about wherein the fact that New York has really, I mean, it scores really low on social interaction and social cohesion, and that's why the whole standard of living it dropped quite a bit. So that's a very good example of how sustainability, business, profitability, all of them need to be geared towards a certain degree of human sensitivity, and need to sort of look at human beings as the point of beginning and end. So now we can open the floor to questions. There were a few really interesting questions, and I think they have been more or less addressed, but then it would be nice for Padmashri and Monica to sort of pick out the questions and sort of pitch it out to the panelists. I hope that was audible. I don't know. I don't trust my Wi-Fi connection at this moment. I hope I was audible.
Okay.
You shouldn't trust it.
I think so. Brinda Sen Gupta, she's asked us, as urban planners and urban designers, we always advocate high density and mass transit for sustainable environment. However, this high density also becomes a situation where social distancing in a pandemic situation becomes tough, particularly in cities like Mumbai and New York. What would the panelists' view be on this? And perhaps more emphasis on encouraging mixed use, where we live, work, play happens together, making us city centers more affordable for all. So So what's our panelists' viewpoint on that? That's the question.
I can take a stab at that because that was kind of the graph I was showing, was exactly making that point that you have two cities that are comparable in density and commute, but have responded very differently to the pandemic. So Brinda's question is spot on. And I think the answer is very much in blurring sectors, doing more mixed use, not just typologies in buildings, but neighborhoods. Because if a neighborhood had that, like that was our concept example at the end, that if a neighborhood was self-sufficient enough that it could, if needed, quarantine without losing normalcy, which is a very big thing. Like right now, all the terms we talk about, like quarantine, like testing, like everything has this big fear connotation. But if you think about it in a different way of saying that this is something that's seasonal, that's going to come in every once in a while, there may be something that makes a few of us who are more vulnerable, more susceptible. And at that point, others have to help. There's a notion that we learned recently from social work that's called the strengths-based perspective. And a strengths-based perspective means you bring a group of people together where the strengths of one helps the weakness of the other. That's how intergenerational design works. That's how multi-sector design works. That's how multi-typologies work. And I think we haven't truly taken a strengths-based approach to urban planning and cities. Like we do not necessarily want to put density at fault here. We know a big difference between New York and other equally dense cities like Singapore, who did very fine, was around policy and programs and kind of things that they put in effect very quickly. They had a pandemic response plan. They knew exactly what to do and they did it very quickly. To the points that were raised earlier, the big question for us, and I love what Itai said about not stopping to ask questions, that right now, we're also at a time where things that have worked do not necessarily become the right solutions. And that's a very important thing to remember. Like, for example, after SARS, 30% of the people who were quarantined showed PTSD symptoms. There's going to be a big mental health and burnout consequence of what we're going through. So the short-term effectiveness does not necessarily inform a long-term strategy. But overall, I think it's really important to know that we do need to make resilient and interdependent systems, and mixing typologies, being very intentional in urban planning, policy, and design, and thinking all the way through. Does the way I design policy inform the way I design buildings and neighborhoods to devices and apps? That can help us. I don't know if that answers the question, Brinda, but I think I really do see the end of single sector buildings, but we don't know. That's a hypothesis.
If I may add a few things. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes,
you are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see, I think, therefore, we cannot do away with the way a current city is, or can we, as we said, completely change everything, but still our behavioral patterns, and as also mentioned, see, how do we do that? The design is a key enabler here. Where that is when I mentioned also just say system and design thinking. I mean, an integrated, seamless thinking and planning has to happen. I mean, we just know from, as she mentioned already, about the parts of New York, or whether it's Singapore, or even say, for example, Japan. So it's all the habits. I mean, just like, I mean, say, like Japan also has higher density there in most of the cities than most of the places, but they were able to still curtail. Everybody were mobile. They were not completely shut down. But still, because all had the equal practice and hygiene, and maybe vehicle ensured that if number of people were seated, maybe the next vehicle will come. People were not overrunning into a compartment or a train. So it's a question of, that's again, it's a question of, that's where strategy, planning, and costing, that it becomes even viable to run where everybody is equidistantly, comfortably placed. Because today, every product and system on one side, we are saying it's customer centric, whether it's education, whether it's an entertainment, whether it's a customer centric. So if therefore it comes back to, as I said, design thinking, integrating it to, and plus good practices. How do we link the two? Then I think it can be free, and therefore, and the pricing would, of course, it will not be that, I mean, you will have a ride at, I mean, everybody wants a free ride, but still wants the best of, there has to be a small cost to be paid, or again, you need to see how do we, therefore it's linking the economics, the transport, the density, then it should be feasible. We don't have to completely strike down what we have. Look at the best practices, but in the new paradigm, how do we reframe it? how do we redefine rules? Then it should be possible that, I mean, sustainable development can happen with density. And also at the same time, how do we have discrete, smart, I mean, standalone communities as far as, because that's, see, for example, an old village or a city, everybody lived comfortably in India, but then all from education to trade to entertainment happened in a temple in India. I mean, that was the center of all the activity, but at the same time, plus even if people could not afford the food, the prasada or the food that was given in the temple or a langar in a Gurudwara ensured that even if I did not have enough to earn, I would get my food. And I had a place to rest because it was also safe. So therefore, it's a question of, I mean, coming back to planning and also making, I mean, sustainable living feasible even outside the cities. And that only for some key requirement you come out, or you have efficient transporting, I mean, logistics built in to make sure, and then leverage this, I mean, knockdown when people have started working from home, more integratedly built into processes. So I think we should be in a position to move towards a better enabling, but definitely their technologies, even if 10 people are coming to the bus stop, all of them say, I plan to travel 15 minutes before. The local bus could arrange for a vehicle, depending on where they are coming on, the routes can be mapped. If my Google can immediately tell me which road is denser and you please reroute yourself, it can equally done to the local bus system. So how do we have one or a next set of buses, even assign a seat and say, you please go into this, so that you're not rushing madly 100 people into a door, but then you are having equal distance, space, safety, everything ensured. So therefore, I think connectivity is a key enabler, but this has to go in with some more self-discipline, newer practices, plus well-designed integrated planning. I mean, for connecting all of them in a more efficient way. And I think it should be feasible. So we could still have best of both the worlds. As an optimist that I am, I know we don't have all the answers. We are still we still do not know how far this process will go, what will be the type of, I mean, fatalities, or what all the things we need to change. But then I think we still have enough knowledge and wisdom. As we said, we are in the age of big data and analytics. We have enough information from 5,000 plus years to see how do we now leverage a more equitable society, a beneficial society, and also a still comfortable, and we have to have a happy living. Yeah.
Can I just add a comment to this as well? The subject of social connections and whether we can replace social connections with digital connections, I think is quite a worrying topic at this point, because we'd be fooling ourselves to think that digital connections can replace meeting people physically, seeing their behavior, their gestures, creating trust. And I think trust is the most important thing here. Trust is a very difficult thing to create in a digital connection. And I think in relation to my comment on identity, identity, meaning, purpose, all of these things related to our social context. And I think this raises a very big question, that whether we are able to continue in the way that we have done in relation to social well-being through digital means. The answer is probably no. And then the big question that is raised is what is a must? Because at this point, people are talking about isolation. They're understanding that it causes loneliness and all sorts of other problems. But I think that it's put to the side because of the manner that of this virus, but also the binary nature of death. There is you either die or you live, and therefore the numbers of deaths are always going to trump all the other costs that are going there, because they are visible and we can relate to them more easily. We all understand death, and these kind of questions to me is really what we should be asking first. If we are going to go into a year or year and a half of a corona routine, which is what they're calling it in Israel. So we had a lockdown, and the lockdown is finished. Now we're going into corona routine, which means pretty much lockdown. And the question is, what do we do to allow people to have physical connection with others? Can we talk about, can neighbors create spaces within their buildings where they can socialize? In our building and in almost all residential building, that doesn't exist. Residential buildings are corridors and lifts. And we might ask ourselves, was that the right thing in the first place? And the answer is probably no, because some of the questions that we're asking about post-pandemic cities are actually the same questions we picked up on a decade ago, which is, we have a loneliness epidemic. Social connection is a problem. We need to design for social cohesion. And almost ironically, social cohesion is one of the, I think we will figure out, the biggest factors of whether society's dealt with coronavirus well or not, or successfully or not. So it's kind of eating into our social cohesion in the first place, which is why it needs to be something at the front of the list.
There was a question on the board on, should a pandemic make us more global or tribal? And Natalie's answer was both, like, although it's against Aristotle's logic. And I agree 100%. I truly believe that I think we're entering an era of both in so many ways. Like the report I was mentioning, which is an excellent report on the importance of connecting in real life. We have actually understood the importance of that connection more because of the digital connections that we are now starved for as well. Like, I think there's something that's happening where it's not an either or, it's not single sectors, it's not single disciplines. There is this, and I think part of that very much is this idea of the digital and physical interweaving in ways that we haven't truly completely ever understood, because they've worked in totally different pathways in the past. But what does it mean when they really start blending? What is our physical need? And the same thing about the global and tribal. Like, Natalie, I'd love to hear from you where you were going with this. Yeah, I intuitively agree with you.
Well, pretty much what you said. I think we need, and pretty much what Sir Satyanarayana was also saying. I think we need to revise our habits. We need to revise our decisions. We can be more pessimistic or optimistic about it. I'm an optimist, and yes, there are some sectors of our lives which will hopefully become more global, because we understand through this crisis that this is what works for us globally, and some sectors which will become more regional. That's all.
I think if nothing else,
I think we have
just one last, we just have time for one last question, I think. And it's one of our juniors from RVCA who asked this question, Shashwat. He was talking about how this pandemic has not really been easy on the urban poor either. They unfortunately don't have the security or the luxury of open spaces or even of a balcony. How do we consider and include the urban stuff?
is she audible?
Maybe you can just write the question in the...
Can I just respond? Maybe I just... so this is the question at 7:25.
Yeah.
You see, I mean, I just want to say that, yes, on the face of it, it may look like we are not able to respond, but at the same time, I would just want people to truly document how many, temples, how many chaul trees. See, whether you go to Kurukshetra, whether you go to Benares, whether you go to Mathura, whether you look at any local Gurudwara, see, there are hundreds of, as I said, the original Indian system of sustainable living and sharing even now exists, but these are not accounted in the numbers where people talk about charity or enabling, because they are taken as, oh, there is some irrelevant. That is where we need to rationally document this information and spread it into, and plus, of course, even pricing. And for example, I just want to give an example. We were in Japan, we were staying in a rural area. Most of the local shops to even farms and houses would put produce that they do in small, kiosks outside with a price. People would come and buy whatever they want in the daytime. But after 6, many a time, they would simply remove the price, and people who couldn't afford would take it, but those who could afford will not take that. same produce, so that there was an equitability in a Japanese system. And that's why I said, see, now there are hundreds of such people who are doing charity and distributing food, or as I said, the temples were safe places for people to come and also have the morning or the evening, whatever the prasada that came out, or the food that was distributed from the Gurudwara or the temple or the mosque, whatever. So those things have been practiced. So I believe, I mean, for example, everybody knows Akshaya Patra is an organization today which is delivering millions of meals every day, morning, afternoon, and evening, in a reasonably affordable way. Therefore, there are enough models for us to be equitable. And that's where, as I said in the very beginning, can we develop matrices for costing of things, so that even when I do a small job, I get a decent pay for it. Today, I mean, the distribution between the MD or the CEO of a company who gets, say, in an Indian cost, say, some 100 million as a pay, and in the same company, somebody getting not even $50 million as a monthly pay, is a huge disparity. So that is where I think the data and the modeling connectivity comes into place to cost things more efficiently with sustainability factors built in. And there are enough proof of concept for how to distribute evenly to the poor, because if in spite of not having social security, a nation of 1,375 million people still has enough people, I mean, staying well, I mean, depending on what you define as poverty, but still getting some meal and surviving. And therefore, I think we do not have to be so desperate that, say, everything is out of place. It's a question of now, do we truly start collecting data, putting them all in place, and putting a bet, as we said, but a new model has to come. It may not be business as usual, but it needs to be a newer paradigm in a more equitable, more empathetical society for our fellow beings, to even the non-living things which are around us.
So it seems like there's a lot of interesting questions coming in, but at this point, I would like to ask you guys, how much longer do you guys have?
Maybe 10 minutes.
I'm actually planning to go to a party and a concert in 5 minutes time. So
That is great. That's an excellent example. You must use in the next question. So we have 10 minutes. All right. So, okay, we can probably address the 2 more questions, I think, in that time. This question is from Harsh. He feels, it's more like a comment or a reaction. He feels that the speed of modern life and what we perceive as being productive is really important to consider or reconsider in this scenario. Doing more in less time is at the root of creating much of sustainability issues. But can we slow down being productive after the corona crisis, allowing us to become more conscious and effective? Is it possible in a corporate world? What do you guys think?
If I may add, oh, please. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No. Well, I just wanted to say that, see, as we said, if we have planned things well and modularized activity and defined it clearly, because now everybody is trying to do everything at a cutthroat rate and trying to work at a price of, say, I mean, very small margins, then it becomes very tough. But if we have well planned, we have better parameter and matrices to define the cost and time, and we have optimized it. It doesn't, because we could be very productive and still be also socially active, and nothing stops us from doing that. So therefore, it's a question of not simply saying slowing down, but being more practical, more productive, and also very clear as to what I expect from it, and not be unduly greedy. As Gandhi said, there is enough for everybody's need, but never enough for even one man's greed. So it is a question of how do I cut my greed and relook at my requirements? Then I think time is not an issue. Please, sorry.
No, that's really well said. And I was laughing, Aishwarya, because Harsha's question, it's funny, like a few months ago, I must have repeated extensively to so many people that I wish we could just slow down. Like I was on a plane every week. I must have said this, like to lots of people, like I wish the world would just take a moment, if we could just slow down. And then the slowdown happened, right? It got forced on us. Here we are, it slowed down. And look at all of us. We're still working really long hours. We're still managing to get more burnt out by virtual connection. Right? So there's something fundamentally perhaps masochistic in the way we respond, or maybe, Natalia, to your point, when system 1 kicks in, when we are in a state of fear, we just keep ourselves busy and we keep getting busier. And
I think that's very foundational, that even when we have this opportunity to slow down, maybe we're not slowing down, maybe we don't know how. One of the graphs I took out of my deck was this really nice curve about circadian rhythms and cognitive strength, I think, which shows that our cognitive strength actually follows the circadian rhythm in a day. And all the science, so to speak, and our theoretical understanding of what helps our health and well-being exists. Yet we aren't able to slow down, to disconnect, to do that. And I think that's a big fundamental question that we really have to address, that even this period that could be seen as an opportunity for those who are more privileged or have been lucky enough not to hit, after we do our part, are we able to use this time to reset, or are we using all of this time to just stay in this frenzy? The other thing also, to go back to Itai's point, for me personally, I feel this is a period of huge humility. Like that's been a big lesson. Like the most developed country has the most number of cases, right? It's humility at so many levels. Things we thought we knew, I'm not sure if those are true. Like this idea of questions that are coming up, that we have to rethink things that we were sure about for years and years and years, and really understand that maybe we didn't know this. Maybe we don't really have a handle on this. Like, how are these things happening? That I think intellectually, it's a period of huge humility as well, trying to back and say, maybe we need to go back to being very curious and very intentional in this period, and slow down if we can, because we do have this opportunity, but I don't know if we're hardwired to do it.
And can I add a comment?
Please.
So I think I don't want to be the pessimist here.
No, don't be.
But I think I have to. But I think being pessimistic allows you to be well prepared for the future. And so I want to start with something pessimistic and end on a good note. I'm pessimistic in the sense that I think we are all experiencing something, a togetherness, this pause or ceasefire in the world. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had with someone where I tried really hard to convince him that he doesn't want his smartphone. And I said to him that if everyone else put their smartphone down and agreed to put it down for a year, you'd be pretty happy without a smartphone. And so it comes back to reference points, right? Our reference with our social context. And I'm pessimistic because I think it's human nature to be competitive in some sense, but it's built into our cities and into our culture that that aspect of human nature gets rewarded. And I think that's something that's still embedded within our cities, the way that we've built it, and it comes and touches topics like inequality. And when you talk about something like social inertia or cultural inertia, which is what we're feeling here, is a slowing down, right? A slowing down, but it's everywhere, it's everyone. And it makes you ask the question, if this is good for some people, then what we should be designing for is choice. The choice for people to choose whether to be in the rat race or to live with dignity by not being in the rat race. So in the same way that I'm saying, some of the questions that we're answering with Corona is very much the question of the city, about inequality, about connection. And therefore, with that pessimism, I would say that one of the best things to come out of this pretty terrible situation is that we are breaking habits, and that's really a matter of time. Humans are creatures of habit, and we need sometimes a process to unlearn things. And I'm optimistic that unlearning will lead to another way of doing things, but I'm not optimistic that it will happen automatically.
If I can just add something to that. No, it doesn't happen automatically. That's the whole point of system 1 and system 2. It's the deliberate process. So
I'm talking about on a cultural level, not on the individual level. I think
there's a link between one and the other. I'm not sure why there's disconnection between individual and social level.
Can I just comment just a small point? I think finally, as we said, we all have to be realist, neither optimist nor pessimist, but pragmatic and realist for sure. I mean, for all our exuberance, but at the same time, it finally comes down to, I think, leadership. If leaderships can demonstrate ethics, integrity. Today, we have seen many murky names. I mean, big companies, big organizations, big leaders falling down because of greed, I mean, dishonesty, I mean, non-ethical process. And therefore, if the slowness or if ethics, integrity, and consideration for humanity comes from top leadership, whether it is a media company, whether it is an industry, whether it is a government leader, or I mean, a social leader, or thought leaders, then I would believe it is possible. But there is dire need for leadership to bring down people to the ground level and say, please do not blindly rush. Yes, we will definitely have choice. I think there is no denying that with the current way the world is connected, choice will always be there. There will not be a dearth of choice, but it's a question of leadership and, as I said, moral ways, which has to be demonstrated by leaders that others choose to follow that rather than go into a process which is mad race and unethical.
I just had a question to all the panelists, if I may.
So yeah, we just need to wrap it up.
Just short.
So, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So now that we're in this situation where what I think I was saying, I read it, it's called growth obligation fallacy, I think, where everyone has to grow at every single point of time. That's kind of been curbed. As academics, as people who are studying about things, what does the strange situation we find ourselves in allow us to study, where the usual conditions are kind of curbed off? Are there anything we can study in this point of time which we couldn't previously?
That's not a short answer, Padmashri. That's a long answer.
The whole discussion is about it.
It's the longest answer. We're all in this giant social experiment. We are in the experiment. We are living the experiment. So I think we're studying constantly. We've kind of become students. Like when I was sharing results from surveys we are doing internally, for example, with just our staff, understanding what does it mean to move to a work environment, work from home thing. And some of the things have been fascinating. For example, why is it that work tends to invade into our home environment much more than home invades into our work environment? Why is that? Right? Why is it that I'm working longer hours, that work is taking over my home life? I'm working in all aspects of my home, but the rest of it isn't. So I think there are many, many things, and it goes back to a lot of these foundational things that as a culture, we had this huge opportunity to observe ourselves and observe our history and observe why we made the decisions we did and why are we still behaving the way we are right now. That I think we should just, all of us, for example, as a community, decide to journal, if nothing else. We should be writing because we do have short memories as a society. We will forget. As soon as things come back to normal, we'll go back. And I think or we'll go back to some kind of a new normal, but this will not remember, and making sure we're learning as we go is vital. But there'll be a very long string of actual questions in response to your question, Padmashri, that we should talk about.
Do you think you could just repeat it in one sentence? Because I lost connection. The question.
Now that we find ourselves in this strange situation where people aren't obligated to, we have this grow at every single point of time that's been cut short, and people aren't outside, even when we're studying urban planning, urban design. Now that people new things that we can afford to study now, that we couldn't previously. Maybe something like that.
Things we can afford to study. I'm not sure I understood the question, but I think Rupali had the right answer. I agree with Rupali that if there's one thing to take from this is some kind of growth in our metacognition, in our awareness of how society shapes us and how space shapes us. Partly because of you don't know what you have till it's gone. So this awareness of how we used to use the city, this awareness of how we used to need social situations in a certain way and probably still do. But most of all, I think it puts us in a situation that gives us lessons for life about our relationship with the space that we either own or don't own. And the ramifications that it has on our freedom. And I think that kind of awareness is something that we can take with us into the future, and we can study and see whether people are looking at space in a different way, whether they are reacting in a different way, and whether it will give us lessons to really think about how we design our cities and our homes as well in the future.
Right. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the Chinese curse. It's not the virus. I'm talking about may you live in interesting times. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I wanted to ask Natalia a question. If I may.
Sure. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
But where
I just want.
has to be
So
like,
I just want to know. I mean, how are you prepared? Are we preparing ourselves to sort of face what the frontline healthcare workers are going to face in terms of like mental health at the end of this? Are we preparing ourselves, or what do we have to do?
Well, sorry, both Padma Shri and the current question was not audible to me, so maybe you are spared of my idiotic thoughts.
Sorry, could someone repeat the question?
Let me just repeat whatever I could hear. She's talking about what kind of preparedness are we really hoping to get out of this in terms of mental health and healthcare in general? And what do you think?
I'm talking about the people in the frontline, the healthcare workers. So,
especially like healthcare workers and how they're going to be dealing with the crisis. And once it's over, what are the repercussions for them and what are the consequences for them?
No, I think if I simply from my layman, I want to just add that more governments will hereafter be far more concerned about equitable distribution and healthcare, because all of us know that we are well connected, and if we cannot afford such pandemics and breakdown. And for example, India itself, more infrastructure is being created. Funds are being allocated. This should have been done 50 years back for education or health. But then both we didn't bother because we are being more happy being creators and profiteering at anybody and everybody's cost, at the cost of even my own mother. But then now that conscious belief that we need to be more equitable even for my wealth, because it has affected more rich people than poor. And this has been more equitable. The disease has been more equitable than anybody else. Therefore, it will create a more better environment, in my opinion. I mean, it will lead to a better infrastructure creation and more care for the society overall.
Right. Would you like to add something, Natalia? It seemed like you wanted to.
So I wanted to add something to Chinese proverb, and then I'll try. There's another Chinese proverb which says that crisis is a chance, an opportunity. I think it's even the same symbol. So let's take it as a take-home message. Maria Monica, with all respect, I don't know what are the consequences, mental consequences of this crisis, and I think there are people who will come out of it stronger, and there are people who will come out of it hurt. Some people will build, will manage to build some sort of resilience, additional resilience. And some not, and then that probably depends on many things, on where you are you at the front line or not, what you do these days, what are your socioeconomic circumstances, how vulnerable you are as individual. There's the whole spectrum of anxiety disorders. Some people are from nature much more vulnerable than others. Speaking about healthcare workers, working long hours doesn't help. And I know that that was one of the problems here in Italy, that the system was so much overwhelmed. There was a shortage of nurses, of doctors, and it took some time to get help from medics from other countries, and also mobilize doctors and nurses who were already in retirement. So this is maybe also something to think about in advance, that there should be a population of doctor and nurses which are automatically mobilized in certain situations. I don't know, but yes, huge strain on healthcare workers, consequences, I don't know.
That was a wonderful session, though. Thank you so much, all of you. There were a lot of glitches, mostly that centered around me leaving and then re-entering the panel discussion again, like a ghost, as I do. But thank you so much for taking out the time. I know you have to go to a party, but thank you. Thank you for putting us somewhere. But thank you for setting the stage for the next two discussions, which are going to happen tomorrow and day after, which will look into, well, the technicalities of town planning and what we can do in the future. And of course, and the third day is more about what's happening in Bangalore in particular, the ground reality of the repercussions of the different coping measures that the government has enforced and encouraged. So this was a really nice bird's eye view that we could get, and was pretty holistic, and it was all tied back to the discourse of conscious cities, because at the end of the day, the four of you are definitely, well, the leaders, the thought leaders in the domain that we want to work. So thank you so much for sharing your views, and thank you so much for sharing the wisdom, so to speak. And
thank you. And congratulations on putting the event together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It was wonderful hearing to everyone. Have a great day or a great evening or great weekend. Anyway, it's first weekend for all.
That's true. And also a huge thank, I think, to the attendees, although we didn't go through all of the questions, the comments are excellent. I hope those are recorded as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank you all for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Have a nice evening.
Namaste.
Day.
Bye.
Good evening.